Welcome to our anatomy class, Act 1, blow him. Anybody have any tips?
On a blowjob?
On my high school classmates.
Cooking up an orgasm.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, chef.
Has she had an orgasm? Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who cares? We're going to break everybody's hearts being like, this is how sad it
Yeah,
is.
this is how
and
sad
then
it
be
is.
like, this is what it could be.
Anyone want to see what my butthole looks like? I can feel your eyes burning on my ass.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective Podcast. I'm your host, Carbon,
And I'm Emily.
And I'm Eva.
and welcome to the show.
So today, as you can tell, we are joined by Eva Bloom, who is a queer sex educator and public speaker here in Toronto, who you may know from social media as @What'sMyBodyDoing. Today, we're going to start off by chatting about the current state of sex education in Canada, the politics around it, and then we're going to dive into queer and trans sex education that you should have gotten in high school, which is Eva's whole brand and thing that you're always speaking about.
Hell yeah.
So we're going to start out this conversation just exploring a little bit about yourself and your story. Would you be able to tell us how you got into the world of sex education and what drew you towards it?
So I've always been a big sex nerd since the idea of sex and relationships became relevant for me. I was big on sex ed YouTube, binge watching Lacey Green,
At what age?
15, 16. I was obsessed with the show One Girl, Five Gays on MTV.
Classic.
I was literally
I miss that generation of MTV shows. They were just a little saucier. There's
Yeah.
less rules, you know?
you have candid conversations about gay sex on MTV. I founded my high school's Gay Straight Alliance and did peer-to-peer sex ed. It's not even that I was in the closet, truly head empty, no thoughts, had never considered the idea that
So
I
when
might
you were
be
doing
queer.
this, did you think you were straight? You're ally, starting the whole club.
Yeah, with my full chest. Posters around the school. I'm like, why are all these teachers being kind of hesitant to start the club? I'm like, this is obviously the cool thing that we're doing. We need it to happen. Yeah. Ally. And the thing is, also nobody was ever hey, let's check in.
Yeah.
Just if there's anything you want to tell us. Nobody.
It's when you're ready.
Yeah.
When you say that you were a sex ed nerd, do you where was this interest sparking from?
I feel it came from an interest in feminism. I don't know, as
Okay.
a person who was socialized as a woman, growing up as a teen girl, you're what the fuck is going on? There's a lot of this is bad, right? I'm trying to
Right?
Yeah.
guys,
Anyone?
something's off.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to navigate how I was being perceived by people in my cohort, the expectations I felt I had to be in terms of a sexual being or in relationships, or even just the stuff of how do I date? How do I ask somebody out? That kind of led into being interested in gender roles and sexuality. Maybe the fact that it is kind of taboo, that people are kind of nervous about it.
Oh, yeah.
At the same time, it informs so much of our society, of our world. So many people in our world are sexual beings, and yet we don't talk about it.
I think that's a really good transition into the actual sex education that we're receiving in school. How does queer and trans specific sex education differ from the standard education that most Canadians are receiving in schools?
I feel there's not as much accountability of are you teaching what the curriculum says? Is this a thing I don't want to teach sex ed, so
Yeah.
There's also still a lot of Catholic schools in Canada, in Ontario.
I went to one.
I hope you're doing okay.
Were you a public school person?
I was, but I TA'd a human sexuality course, and the people that I was TAing at Guelph a couple years ago, they were in Catholic school, the curriculum we had was called Fully Alive, and it was mostly abstinence, stiff. There's a study of young adults in Ottawa of where did you actually get the information about sex ed? And most of them say from their peers, from their romantic partners, from the internet, from porn.
Correct. For me.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody is they learned, it says you learn about risk, you learn about anatomy, you learn about maybe some health stuff. That's what you're learning in school from teachers. But when it comes to pleasure, techniques, gay shit, you teach each other. And there's also interesting stuff about men are more likely to learn from porn, women are more likely to learn from partners. It makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're learning from porn, it's that's not reality either.
No, it's entertainment.
It's entertainment.
Not meant to be education.
Do you think that a part of it is also that like your everything teacher was also your sex ed teacher.
Yeah,
because like
is.
they were teaching me math, they were teaching me English and history, and then sex ed. And it's like, wait, you don't know all this stuff. How could you possibly? And at the time, I was just like, okay, whatever you say. But like looking back on it, I was like, wow, that was like really poorly orchestrated.
Or it's like your gym teacher. But I remember we got separated, boys versus girls. Basically, what was provided to us was just based off of just wearing a condom, like the different forms of contraception, STIs, and then menstrual cycle stuff, and like getting your period and that kind of piece. And that was kind of it. No talk about like any gender identity, sexuality, anything else.
Healthy relationships, boundary, consent, abortion,
None
neurodiversity in sex, chronic illness in sex. Like, when we talk about like what's the difference between the sex ed you get in school versus queer and trans sex ed, like it's also like what is comprehensive sex ed? What is trauma-informed sex ed? Like there is so much more than just like the body parts and the acts to what like sex ed and sexuality ed is all about. And I think too, like I agree, like whether it's your gym teacher or your like math teacher.
Your world studies teacher.
Exactly. Like I think those people aren't exempt to the idea we get from society that like you should just know about sex. And like I think there's this level of like shame that people feel when like finding sex education. And I think those teachers probably have that thing too where it's like, I'm an adult, I should be able to teach these kids how to have sex, when it's like there are people that, you know, get a lot of degrees, read and write a lot of books, like it's a whole thing.
Do you think our standard sex education is actually working for anybody right now? In your opinion, are there downfalls, and how is it hurting more than just the queer community?
It sounds overdramatic, but I don't think it is. We have accepted as a society that it's okay for everybody to have a certain level of sexual trauma. When you don't get taught what consent is, what boundaries is, what healthy relationships are, I should know the stat of like how many women experience sexual violence, but it's a stupid fucking number. And it's even higher for queer and trans people. That is the direct result of like if you don't teach people consent, boundaries, healthy relationships. And also like there's so much shame, like if you don't teach people that there is a diversity of ways to have a body, to like have desires, to experience desire and arousal, whether you're queer or trans or cis het, there are unrealistic expectations put on everybody. We're gonna break everybody's hearts being like, this is how sad it is. And then be like, this is what it could be.
The tea is almost everyone knows someone who has been sexually assaulted, but not everybody knows an assaulter, you know what I mean? Because those conversations are not open and aren't being had, and is a product of the poor sex education that we're receiving too. It's like I think everyone is a victim in this situation, I would say.
Yeah, the norms for like cis het men's like sexuality, like every single piece of media, every single movie is like you're supposed to be aggressive, you're supposed to keep like pushing if she says no. It's incredibly powerful, like ideas of like gender expansiveness and gender fluidity. Releasing ourselves from these expectations helps everybody be in their fullness. I would also shout out my wonderful friend Marley Liss, who like does trauma-informed sex ed and like restorative justice work. So if you want to like a real fucking deeper understanding of consent, like she's your girl.
So there is a lot of debate around whether or not sex education should be provided to children. And that debate gets even more heated when we talk about making that sex education inclusive of queer and trans people. Would you be able to tell us from your perspective why providing this education is important?
A big part of it is the like sexualization of queer and trans people and identities, like assuming that like queerness and transness is about sex exclusively. And then people are like, you can't talk about that around the children. But the truth is that like twofold, that like queer and trans identity is so much more.
A lot more.
Than sex.
Yeah.
About love, about relationships, about community, and also sex. And then the fact that like queer adults don't just like spring out of the ground at 18.
Totally.
Yeah, like there are queer kids, and like again, if we assume that sex is not just like the physical act, like there's a age appropriate way to teach like all of the plethora that is queer sex ed to youth. Talk about relationships, talk about expression, talk about bodies, talk about identity and gender.
Do you think the term sex ed perhaps might be the problem. What's the problem here? Like, is it freaking people out? Is that the actual problem? It's like, could we put it under a different umbrella? Like, are there solutions? What do we do? You know what I mean?
We also get that comment a lot, just like on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram page. It's like, why are you so obsessed with like your sexuality? Why are you talk about your sexuality so much? And it's like, it's not just, it's a part of it.
My whole identity.
Yeah, you're like, this impacts every single part of my life. Straight people don't realize that they talk about straightness all the time, that their whole lives are revolve around straightness because it's the norm.
How do we depoliticize this conversation and like actually serve the children what they need? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Gotta serve the children.
serve.
If you look at like the Ontario sex ed curriculum, it's not called sex ed. Like it's called like a health curriculum. I think part of it is like a cultural shift about like what sex means, like period, and like a greater understanding that like sex is so much more than just like penetration.
Have you experienced any of this kind of debate sort of around like providing children sex education? Is that ever something that you've received personally, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I like co-hosted a like web series teaching kids about sex. It was so wild. In the like gender identity episodes, we would like ask these questions about gender and like, what does it mean to be non-binary? What does it mean to be trans? And they were like, I know. Not a prejudiced thought, like, in the world. So, yeah, sometimes people will come on my Instagram, like, to those old posts and be like, what's we teaching the children that? What are we teaching them? Teaching them about health. Teaching them about their bodies. Teaching them that it's okay to be gay. And for them to be like, we shouldn't teach them that. I'm like, well, we just have a difference of fundamental, like.
Also, whose job is it then, if not, like, a sex educator? Like, is it... Like, I feel like a lot of people think that it's like just up to the parents, but like the parents only have like one experience, which is their own. They don't have the plethora of like academic resources as well that a sex educator dives into.
First thing is, your parents, I feel like, are often the most awkward and most unqualified people to teach you that.
Like, I don't want my parents teaching me that.
Who is like given the options? I mean, like my parents, nobody.
No. Often those people, if they are the ones teaching you, you're less likely to ask important follow-up questions. You're probably going to race to the end of this conversation.
I'd be like, okay, thank you so much. I gotta go now. Bye. Exactly. I gotta study for a really important thing somewhere.
At least that's how it's always portrayed in TV when you're having like the birds and the bees conversation. It's like, it's always like that. It's always like you're so tense and you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
I had a big fear of sex. First of all, I'll get pregnant. I'll get an STI. I like HIV. That was big talk. Big talk. And AIDS, I was like, I would get AIDS. I'm gonna get AIDS.
Even those conversations around like STIs and like HIV and like AIDS, like those are not like helpful practical conversations. Like how many of us like actually got taught like this is how you go get an STI test?
Right.
Like,
no, they didn't teach that. They're like, you're gonna get it, but you're not going to know about it until you're dying.
In terms of like HIV and AIDS, like there's been a lot of really amazing scientific developments. And like in 2012, they found out that like if you are on medication and you're HIV positive and the viral load is low enough to be undetectable, you cannot transmit HIV.
What do you think are the most common misconceptions about trans and queer sex education? And can we bust those myths right on the spot?
Can we bust them?
I feel like we've like covered a lot of them. Like the idea that like it is about sex. Queer people are like fucking all the time. Like sex education as a whole is like so much more holistic than that it's helpful for everybody. There are so many tools now, like PrEP, like that, like U equals U exists, like that there's no one queer experience, like queer sexual experience. Like queer and trans sex ed should include asexual people and aromantic people and demisexual people too. Our messages about what sex is very like towards like the cishet male gaze. So it's gonna favor like that you should have like spontaneous desire. You should automatically like see someone hot and be like, like let's fuck. When like that's really not everybody's experience. Yeah, I'm very much pro like expanding sex to even be like, what does intimacy look like? Cuddling and like making out and like close contact. Like there's so many ways to have like intimacy and you get to like decide what that looks like for you.
What I wanted to add to that was that I think the work that you're doing is really valuable, because even when our school system is failing us because of all of these political barriers and all of these steps that we have to go through to get something into a curriculum, I think the valuable thing about the internet these days is that a lot of kids have more accessibility to this knowledge if they want it. On the other end, when people like yourself are creating these resources, they have good information to actually go to, which I think is great. With that being said, let's kind of jump into this good information that you have to share. Where we'd like to start is sexual scripts, and I'm wondering if you could sort of define that for us first.
Sexual scripts are basically the idea that like we are taught norms and rules about what sex is through the media, through like school, through religion, even like in our interpersonal dynamics. Women are supposed to be submissive in the bedroom. Men are supposed to be more dominant or like initiators in the bedroom. Sex is penetrative. Sex is penis and vagina, or like penis and anus. Like all of these like rules, like handed a script for a play, and we're like, okay, act one, blow him. Like,
True.
If you're looking at like porn, for example, it's like the guy getting off.
Yeah, that there should be an orgasm.
Yeah.
That like especially the person with a penis,
Should
their
be
orgasm and sex.
It's not over until they've had it.
Yeah. And then has she had an orgasm? Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who cares? And even things like dating and like relationship rules, like the relationship escalator of like you go on a date, like you start dating, you become monogamous, you like get married, you have kids, you move in, like those like scripts
huge
too.
one.
Yeah.
I feel like for our generation, especially for myself, I found so many of these sexual scripts in magazines. And I'm wondering where kids are kind of getting it now. And I'm guessing it's the internet, because magazines are RIP, but it's kind of wild the shit that they would write in like 17 magazine and Teen Vogue and like Cosmo, and I'd be like reading it like gospel of like how to give a blowjob. And it's just like the sexualization.
Wait, 17?
They would
Whatnot was
write the
telling you how to
wildest shit.
give.
It might have been in Cosmo magazine. Like I was like so curious because I wasn't getting this information, and I was like, what? And I didn't want to have a conversation with my parents. You know what I mean?
No.
No. Getting those Cosmos on the way out, you get your little snack. You're like,
And the only way I knew
How do I do this?
legit.
Yeah.
The only way I knew how to use the internet at that point was like Facebook chat rooms, that kind of vibe. You know what I mean? Neopets.
You aren't gonna Facebook status. How does anybody have any tips
On a blowjob.
on my high school classmates?
So speaking about sexual scripts, how do you think these uniquely impact the queer and trans community?
Yeah, well, I think like I work a lot with like late bloomers and people who've like come out more recently, and there is this like sense of overwhelm from a lot of them of like, it was so much easier to follow the script. They gave it to me. I just did blah, 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 blah. I think there's a lot of pressure on all genders around like performance around sex, that like you're supposed to really like perform, give your partner pleasure, like be really good at it. There's this like overwhelm of like, what do you even do like when you like move beyond the scripts? But I also get really excited because I'm like, that means that you get to make the sex that you want to make. It's really vulnerable to truly say what you like. And truly sit and be embodied in your pleasure. It's also a huge shift from being like, this is the script, to being like, what do you like?
Yeah.
It's a bit scary.
You tell me what you like, I tell you what I like, and we pick what is in the middle, and that is what we do.
I feel like when I started was when somebody else started asking me, and I was like,
And it expanded your universe.
Ask? I was like, hello?
Me?
When you're trying to come out of these sexual scripts, it's like you kind of go from this brain off, no thinking place where it's so easy to like potentially accidentally overthinking.
Yeah. Part of that can be like, the fear of like, especially like new queer experiences that you're like, I really, really want it to be good, and I really, really want them to have a nice time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you out there, the
Yeah.
amount that you're sitting here asking yourself this question, I want to bring them a lot of pleasure. I want to make this a mutually beneficial experience. You're already doing it.
It can be also a really good thing when you start exploring new things together.
There can be fun in the not knowing and the discovering together.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for like getting out of your head?
One thing that helps me is like honestly like dirty talk, or like describing what's happening. I feel like really helps me like ground myself in the present present. I feel like our culture in general really disconnects us from our body all the time.
Totally.
Yes.
We're like on our phone, we're at work. Like if you never practice actually being in your body, actually experiencing sensations, giving yourself experiences of pleasure, if you never do that and expect yourself to just like click into it like while you're having sex, like no wonder it's gonna be really hard.
Yeah.
So like building those practices of like, I'm gonna drink this cup of tea and I'm gonna like feel how warm it is on my skin, really take the time to like breathe. Those practices help in sex too.
Sex and like what feels good isn't always like one specific part either. Like it can be your arm. Encouraging to explore outside of like the parts in porn where you're like, okay, that's the spot. Going outside of it can be a very, very helpful tool as well.
I have a little exercise that I do in my queer and trans sex ed workshop called body mapping. What are the green areas that you like to be touched? What are the yellow areas? What are the red areas? You can do it with like solo. You can do it with partners. You can also do it in like a somatic way. Let me like breathe and like feel into the different parts of my bodies and like how do I really feel about it?
Opening up communication in the bedroom, especially when you're new, can be very nerve-wracking. And for people coming out later in life, which I know we've been speaking about, having a same-sex partner can feel like being a virgin all over again. Like you're scared and have no clue what to do.
Oh yeah. I was terrified.
100%. Do you have any tips for effective communication with sexual partners and kind of like speaking to sharing preferences, asking for consent, sharing your STI status, like all of these good things? How do we talk about them?
A big part of it is like learning and doing your own like self-exploration and like bringing that to the table. And yeah, like understanding that like each new person you have sex with is a whole new body that you're going to learn. We love want, will, won't lists or yes, no, maybe lists where you just write the things where you're like, yes, I want to do that. Maybe I want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. There's a framework that I shared on Instagram that people really resonated with, which is like, are you a yes until no person or a no until yes person? So are you a type of person that's like, yes, you initiate stuff to me and I will tell you no, stop when I want to like check in or swap?
Right.
Or am I the type of person that you want to like, please check in each time before you initiate and I'll give you the go ahead? So yeah, even
that's
like,
good. I like that.
right? Because like neither one is like the right way to communicate or exist, but like you can see it's very clear like miscommunications can happen.
You brought up kind of the point of like trauma informed approaches and like sometimes in sex when you have had a traumatic sexual experience is like sometimes it can be triggering out of the blue for you and like you're not even sure where it's coming from. It's like an overwhelming experience. But how do you think we can support ourselves but also support partners who have experienced this kind of situation?
Truly, like if it's easier to say the word red than it is to be like, I don't know what's happened, but for some reason I'm really triggered right now and I need to stop. Like, you just and then like have like, okay, what are the things that I know that feel grounding in that moment? Like, do I like to be held? Like, do deep breathing? Like the kind of like anxiety exercises of like name 3 things I can see, 3 things I can smell, like that type of stuff. Also looking for things that like are go-tos that you do like and enjoy. Yeah, expanding that definition of sex can be helpful too. Like all types of intimacy, like using toys can be really powerful tools.
Do you have specific advice for has a partner that has experienced sexual assault but doesn't necessarily know how to deal with it, or maybe it's the first time dealing with it, they've been dealing with it the best way they can, but maybe they want to do a better job?
Really showing up with like that warmth and no judgment and like love, and really being like, it is okay for us to pause whenever you need to. Yeah, and not making a big deal when somebody like does stop things or like check in.
Another piece of like communication is also STI status, and that's something that is so stigmatized in our society. Things that have been like constructed and like fear mongered around, and some of like the information has changed since we've last had health and sex education in school. So how should we be approaching these conversations, and how should we also be like holding space and receiving these conversations when someone, maybe a sexual partner, is opening up and being vulnerable about their statuses with us?
I think really centering the idea that like this is about love and care and like taking care of each other's health. I am telling you when I last got tested, what I got tested for, and what my status is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I give a shit about my health, and I give a shit about your health. I ask you, do you want me to bring the toys? My place or yours? Also, this is when I last got tested. We can use a dental dam. We can use the My Laurels, latex panties. We can use condoms, whatever's comfortable for you. STIs are really fucking common. And I feel like one's
more common than we think.
Yeah. And especially I feel like herpes is still cool to make a butt of a joke. And I'm absolutely fuck off. So many people have herpes, and you can continue to have amazing sex and relationships.
And so many people have it who don't know that they have it too. It's dormant in so many people.
Yeah, cold sores.
You can also get it from non-sexual acts as well.
100%.
A lot of these affect your life much less than you would think.
For some of them, the sooner you catch them, the sooner you're able to start treating them.
Right.
And then the less they have impact on your life.
Yeah.
I would recommend Ella Dawson is a great herpes advocate, and I feel like it's huge to just put a face to an STI and be oh, she's cool. she's great.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Ones that aren't the ones that you manage, chlamydia, gonorrhea.
Yeah.
I'm what happens if you get those? You go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
They give you medication.
Yeah.
Take the medication.
Yeah.
You're not sick anymore.
Yeah. And I feel like
boom.
Literally just people talking about them getting it has done so much. Kind of the funny thing is I feel like chlamydia and gonorrhea, they're becoming more of a joke than a scary thing now. I'm seeing so many people post about it.
It's a Chris Olsen. Chris Olsen
hilarious. I love
changed
Chris
the
Olsen.
game for chlamydia.
And a bunch of comedians too, but I feel like it's mainly men though that feel comfortable doing this, which is interesting. I see less femme presenting people feeling comfortable.
Do you think perhaps it's a little bit tied to the slut shaming piece?
Yeah, that that already exists, and that there's even more pressure that women shouldn't be sexual beings, and that any amount of sexual activity makes you dirty, and then you add on this layer of STIs also make you dirty. And that's the whole thing, that having an STI doesn't change anything about who you are as a person.
Can I ask a personal question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
For the two of us, we are partners, but we're also business partners, and then we also live together. I know that for us, business can really get in the way of our relationship if we're on a date or something. Sometimes business comes up, and I'm like, what are we doing? Put that away for now.
This is not a business meeting.
This is not a meeting.
How did it become?
Should I put this on the business card, or is this a date for realsies? Or do you have any advice or tips on how to navigate that and make it a little bit more separated so that your sexual intimacy doesn't get compromised?
I mean, I think the idea of the dual control model. Have y'all heard of the dual control model?
Please.
What is that?
It's basically the idea that you can think of arousal kind of as a gas pedal and a brake in your brain, that there are these two systems, and that your brain is constantly reading cues in your environment, will either turn on the gas pedal or turn on the brake. If you are in work mode all the time, I'm getting all this information, I'm in this part of my brain that is sending all these cues, it's not time to get turned on, your foot is heavy on the brake. It is a process to be okay, what cues can I switch in my brain to tell myself it is okay, whether that's change the lighting, move to a different room, change the music. I don't know, for people who have kids, I'm put your kids at a babysitter.
For me, I'm I don't know if I could even have a dog in the room. I'm I don't know how people do that. I'm I can feel your eyes burning on my ass.
This is not you time.
Yeah,
this is a private
we're not
moment. And then also thinking what are the things that press the brake? Or press the gas. I don't know how to drive. I'm gay.
We all know gays can't drive.
But the thing that makes the car go, I don't know, changing out of your work clothes, putting on something that feels more comfortable.
That's
or,
a good point.
Yeah,
I don't do that.
Yeah.
I do think that
my
that's
work
a part
pajamas.
of it.
These are my formal pajamas.
Regular pajamas. Formal
casual.
pajamas.
I think this also relates to the idea of responsive desire, and that you build up these cues, and your brain is able to kind of move into that place gradually of okay, I'm touching you in a different way.
Yeah.
We're having conversations that are maybe more intimate, maybe more flirty. Your brain has to kind of catch up and set yourself up for the success, to instead of going from laptop is close.
Yeah.
Your brain's what's happening? Yeah.
I'm working on it. I've been having a hard time with that.
Especially when when you are a professional queer person.
Yeah.
Like your work,
Professional queer right here.
True. Sex
Somebody
is
call my
also your
name?
work.
your like professional life is also related to like your personal identity.
Yeah.
And yeah, like carving out things of like, okay, maybe there are stuff that I don't create content about, stuff that
Right.
like is just for me.
Maybe I'm too much of an open book. Anyway.
I know.
Whatever. Anyone want to see what my butthole looks like? I'm just kidding. So this next piece is kind of still around communication, but specifically around trans, non-binary bodies. How do you create like a safe and comfortable space for someone who is transitioning, has transitioned, et cetera, et cetera? How do we do that?
Language can be really helpful to be like, what language do you like to use for your body? Like what feels affirming? Like what doesn't feel affirming? Are there certain sex acts that make you feel euphoric or more dysphoric? Even like what language do you like to be described with? Like more masculine or like feminine or androgynous, like compliments. Supporting like partners of survivors can also be applicable. Like in terms of like if you feel triggered around dysphoria, like have a safety plan and like be able to be grounded and like come back to what you know does feel good.
Yeah.
And also like being creative. You can call your body whatever you want. You want to call your clit your dick? Party. If you want to call your
party.
Party. If you want to call your prostate your G-spot, you get to define what different sex acts mean and like what gender connotations they have.
It's your sex life. It's gotta be done how you want it.
Play pretend, baby.
Play pretend.
We're on a floating rock. We're not flat earthers here on the Queer Collective podcast. And human beings and like our experiences are way more diverse and expansive and contradictory than these different boxes can be.
Is there things kind of on the other side that you'd want to say to someone who is transitioning and is kind of exploring? I feel like especially like language would be a big piece, like daddy language. And like I'm seeing so many jokes about androgynous.
We're both like you have to explain daddy
About
language.
daddy language.
You have to
I
keep
don't know,
going.
calling someone daddy. But I just mean like jokes around like calling someone like you're such a sexy person or something like that. It's like, oh, was that? I don't know if that sounded even hot anymore.
So we're all going to go to the comments and we're all going to brainstorm the gender neutral daddy.
Yeah, what is it? Caregiver.
I know. Chef.
What?
Captain.
I
Sir.
like chef.
Lord. I like chef too. I like chef. I like
Yes, chef.
captain. Yes, chef.
Yes, chef.
Cooking up an orgasm.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, chef.
Your Highness.
Your Highness.
Your liege.
Liege.
And I mean, daddy
Gaylord.
and mommy can be
Yeah.
good if you're not binary and like it feels good to use either of those words or both.
You could use them interchangeably as well.
Yeah.
The next piece is kind of around pleasure anatomy. What do you think are some of the most important things that people should know about pleasure anatomy, particularly as it pertains to queer and trans bodies?
One of the big ones is that like we have homologous genitals.
Homologous.
Welcome to our anatomy class.
Yeah, please.
Basically what it means is that like our genitals started out
All the same.
all the same. And then we just get arranged.
You keep
in-
using big words for things I already know.
How important is academia? Do we need the fancy word for the thing? I think that's like really powerful in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One, for kind of like demystifying the idea that like, oh, vulvas and penises are so different. And like, especially I feel like this idea that like vulvas are so gross and like so complicated. And like, it's like, no. Also helpful for people who are new. I'm like, baby, you have transferable skills. If you know how to give a good blowjob, you probably like know how to suck a clit pretty well. And then also in terms of like trans people, in terms of like getting creative, like the G-spot and the prostate are homologous. We can reclaim that language and like rethink and explore. The other big piece is that the myth that there's only two ways the genitals can look. There's biodiversity. Like there is a huge spectrum.
Hormone replacement therapy, HRT, is a really important tool for affirming our gender, as many of us know. Would you be able to help us explore the different ways that this can impact us physically, especially as it pertains to sexual response?
So testosterone and estrogen can definitely change like
Yeah.
full body physically and mentally in terms of like genitals for people on T. Lots of people experience bottom growth, which is when like the clitoris gets larger. Also gets very sensitive. I feel like I've heard anecdotally some people on testosterone like get bottom growth and they're like putting on jeans and they're like, I can feel it's rubbing again. Like it's on it's very intense. Things can become drier. So you want to make sure that you're using extra lube. For people on estrogen, there can be like decreased frequency and intensity of like erections. You can find it like harder to get an erection. Also, just like in general for genitals, like the texture of your genital can change. Like on estrogen, like things feel like smoother and softer. Like it feels different. And like ejaculation can be different. Some people say there's also like more like all over body sensation on estrogen than they had before. Orgasms can change. Yeah.
Can we talk about some of the unique sexual health challenges that queer and trans people face and what steps we can take to better understand our own bodies and our own sexual health?
I mean, I think a big one, like especially for like sapphic people, is like myth that like sapphic people, lesbian, queer women just like don't get STIs and we like don't need to worry about sexual health at all.
Incorrect.
This is not to like scare people, but STIs get transmitted through like fluid exchange. So if you're like scissoring, like vulva on vulva, like that is a potential. Oral sex.
Yeah. I think often like doctors perpetuate this though because you go in to be tested. Questions kind of stop for you once you say you're like a lesbian. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like it often starts with like, well, could you be pregnant? And I'm like, definitely not. I only have like female sexual partners. And then it's like, oh, okay. And then closed. There's no more questions. You know what I mean?
Or it's they're like, I don't believe you. You need to take a pregnancy test anyway.
And then you're like, I would like some follow-up, please.
That's super real. And I will also say, like, I think it's become like a fun joke in like the lesbian community to talk about this because like it is so frustrating with doctors. But I will also say that like we know trans lesbians exist. Like there is lesbian sex that can't get you pregnant. That like you can't be having PIV sex or people on T, like there's still a chance you can get pregnant. So if you're having sex that can get you pregnant, I still want to use a condom. We talked about PrEP, which is good if you are a queer man or somebody who's having sex, a lot of casual sex, and you don't always use condoms. It like greatly reduces your risk of like getting HIV. And I don't want to like perpetuate the stigma that like gay men are the only ones that are like having a lot of sex or having sex is like riskier. Like if you're like a trans man and you're gay, you're queer, like you're having a lot of casual sex without condoms, probably still want to be on PrEP.
Yeah. And one thing I will say around like the doctor's piece too is like, while I have had negative kind of experiences with doctors, a lot of the time it's from like family physicians or people who aren't exactly like sexual health doctors, but there are a lot of great like sexual health clinics everywhere, especially in big cities too, which is really great. And I find those doctors are always like very trauma informed and often like queer informed too. So it's like those can be good spaces to go to have bigger and more inclusive and better conversations too. So even if like you don't feel comfortable talking to your family doctor, I think there's other doctors that you can have better, more well-rounded conversations with.
100%.
Are there any resources you'd want to recommend for folks who want to learn more about queer and trans sex education?
I love the podcast, The Dildorks. One of the hosts is like a cis bi, like demisexual woman, and the other host is a bi trans man. They talk a lot about like kink too and like solo sex and masturbation. I also love the book Girl Sex 101 by Allison Moon. For like queer men's like sexual health, by Bobby Box is also in Toronto. But yeah, he's like gay men sexual health stuff. Also Tuck Malloy, who's at intra_sensual on Instagram, non-binary trans mask, has a really awesome workshop about like gender euphoria in the bedroom, which like I took and I was like like the whole time. Oh, also Evian Whitney for like resources around like asexuality spectrum and me.
Yes, you're a great resource as well. So on that note, where can people find you, and do you have any exciting fun projects coming up that people can look forward to?
So people can find me at What's My Body Doing on Instagram. I have an archive on TikTok. Maybe one day I'll come back to TikTok. But yeah, I'm actually leading a Sex Ed for Late Bloomers masterclass like webinar series at the end of May that talks about busting queer imposter syndrome, foundational queer sex skills, and communication tips. I'm also, like I said, a speaker. So if you work at a university and you want to bring queer and trans sex ed to your university, to your orientation, talk about communication, I'm here. You can hire the fuck out of me.
Thank you, Eva, so much for joining us. It was such a lovely conversation. And if you want to dive deeper into more sex-related conversations, click this video right over here. Please do make sure to hit subscribe. And until next time, peace.